My name is Jessica Hayes, and I was 27 years old when I realized that loving someone doesn't always mean knowing them. When people saw us online, we looked effortless, polished, happy, in that curated, aspirational way that makes strangers believe they're seeing something real. My boyfriend Lucas Morgan was a lifestyle influencer, not one of those massive household names, but big enough to matter. Around 85,000 followers on Instagram, steady brand deals, free products arriving at his apartment every other day, skincare routines, brunches, outfit reels, day in my life videos. Lucas lived comfortably inside the camera. I existed slightly outside of it. When we started dating 14 months earlier, I knew social media was his world. I didn't love being filmed constantly the way a casual dinner could turn into 15 minutes of retakes, or how moments that felt private to me became content the second his phone came out. But I cared about him, and love has a way of convincing you that discomfort is temporary, that compromise is the same thing as growth. He posted us occasionally, couple photos, vacation snapshots, videos where he laughed while I pretended to enjoy him doing my makeup. His followers loved it. They commented things like relationship goals and "you're so lucky." Sometimes he'd show me the comments with a smile like we were winning at something invisible. I wasn't jealous of his success. If anything, I admired his discipline, but our lives were different. I'm a software engineer. I make decent money, not influencer money, not flashy, but stable, comfortable. Lucas knew that. He also knew I kept cash in my wallet. I always had. It was an old habit from my years working service jobs when tips were king and cards weren't always an option. 3 months before everything fell apart, I started noticing something small but unsettling. My cash was disappearing. At first, it felt ridiculous to even think about. I'd withdraw $200 at the start of the week, and by Wednesday I'd be down to $60. No memory of spending it. No big dinners, no shopping sprees, no unusual tips. I told myself I was just distracted. Work had been busy. Maybe I'd forgotten something. Then it happened again, and again. The pattern didn't hit me all at once. It crept in quietly, the way doubt always does, when you don't want to believe it. I started paying closer attention without telling anyone, counting the bills in my wallet before bed, counting them again in the morning. Some nights everything was fine. Other mornings, a 20 was gone, sometimes 2. What made my stomach drop was the timing. It only ever happened when Lucas stayed over. He slept at my place 4 or 5 nights a week. We'd talked about moving in together. I'd met his family. I'd pictured a future that felt solid, normal, safe. The idea that he could be stealing from me felt so absurd that my brain refused to hold on to it for long. Every time the thought surfaced, I pushed it back down. Love does that. It protects the story you want to keep believing. But numbers don't lie. One Friday night, I decided to stop guessing. I put exactly $180 in my wallet, 9 crisp 20s. I left it in its usual place on my dresser. Lucas came over like always. We ordered food, watched a movie, fell asleep, tangled together like nothing was wrong. The next morning, while he was still asleep, I counted. 7 20s. $40 gone. I didn't say a word. I didn't accuse him. I didn't even look at him differently. At least I don't think I did. I needed more than one night. I needed to be sure. The following weekend, it happened again. $60 over 2 nights. The weekend after that, $80. By the time 2 months had passed, I'd done the math more times than I could count. Somewhere between $600 and $800 had vanished from my wallet, taken in pieces so small they were meant to go unnoticed. I wasn't angry yet. I was something worse. I was heartbroken and confused. Lucas had income. Not a lot, but enough. Free products, paid partnerships, gifted meals. Why would he steal from me? Why risk everything? For 20s pulled quietly from a wallet while I slept. That question followed me everywhere. To work, to the gym, to bed. And eventually it cornered me into doing something I never imagined I would do to someone I loved. I decided I needed proof. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to destroy him, but because I needed the truth to exist outside my own head. Because I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, and I couldn't confront someone I was considering a future with based on suspicion alone. So I bought a small camera, the kind disguised as a phone charger. I positioned it carefully angled toward my dresser and plugged it in. It felt wrong, invasive, like crossing a line you can't uncross. But something inside me already knew that the line had been crossed long before the camera ever arrived. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost us. The first night after I installed the camera, nothing happened. I woke up early, heart pounding harder than it should have, and checked the footage before Lucas even stirred beside me. The video showed hours of stillness. Just the faint glow of the streetlight through the curtains, the quiet rise and fall of our bodies breathing in sync. No movement toward the dresser, no shadow crossing the frame, no theft. Relief washed over me so fast it almost made me dizzy. I told myself I'd been wrong, that my suspicion had been poisoning something good, that the missing cash had to be my own carelessness magnified by stress and paranoia. I felt ashamed for even thinking Lucas could do something like that. When he woke up and smiled at me, pulling me close and mumbling about making coffee, I kissed him like I'd just been forgiven for something. The second night, nothing happened again. By then, I was convincing myself that the camera had been a mistake, that I'd crossed an emotional line I could never explain all for nothing. I started rehearsing how I'd unplug it and throw it away, how I'd laugh about this later, how I'd tell myself that trust had won. But doubt doesn't disappear just because you want it to. The third night, Lucas stayed over again. We went out to dinner, one of those places he loved photographing, warm, lighting minimalist plates of dessert that looked better on camera than it tasted. He posted a story while we waited for the check, tagging the restaurant, tagging me, adding a heart emoji. I smiled when he held the phone up because that's what I'd learned to do. We fell asleep around midnight. The next morning I woke before him, my chest already tight. I don't know what told me that this time would be different. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way my body had been bracing itself for days. I took my laptop into the kitchen and pulled up the footage. At first, it was nothing but darkness and stillness fast-forwarded in uneasy silence. Then, at exactly 2:07 a.m., I saw movement. Lucas sat up slowly, careful not to wake me. He glanced toward the bed, then toward the door, then toward the dresser. He moved with the ease of someone who wasn't nervous, who wasn't improvising. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was routine. I watched him stand across the room and open my wallet. He didn't hesitate. He flipped through the bills with practiced fingers, counted quietly, and pulled out 2 20s, folded them once, slid them into his pocket, closed the wallet, put it back exactly where it belonged. Then he returned to bed, settled under the covers, and wrapped an arm around me like nothing had happened. The video ended with us asleep, indistinguishable from any other night. I sat there staring at the screen long after the clip finished my coffee going cold on the counter, my hands shaking just enough that I had to set the laptop down. There was no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, no explanation that could soften what I'd just watched. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't need. This was entitlement. I didn't confront him that morning, or the next day, or the day after that. I carried the knowledge around like a secret weight, heavy and sharp, cutting into every interaction. When Lucas laughed, I wondered how long he'd been lying to my face. When he kissed me goodbye before work, I felt the ghost of his hands in my wallet instead of on my waist. Every tender moment was now paired with a quiet, devastating second version I couldn't unsee. For 3 days, I did nothing. Part of me still wanted an explanation that would make it hurt less. Part of me wanted to believe this was some isolated mistake, some lapse he'd apologize for if I just gave him the chance. But the footage had destroyed that illusion. The calmness, the repetition, the ease. You don't move like that the first time you steal from someone you love. Then Lucas posted the photo. It was from a restaurant we'd been to the week before, a place that cost about $150 for the 2 of us. In the picture, I was smiling at him across the table, wine glass, raised unaware of how much of myself I was about to lose. The caption read like a performance I suddenly understood too well. Date night with my rock. She spoils me rotten. Seriously, this woman buys me everything. So blessed. The comments poured in within minutes. People calling him lucky, asking where they could find a girlfriend like me, saying our relationship was goals. I stared at the screen, the video still burned into my memory, and something inside me went very still. Not angry, not emotional. Clear. If he was willing to build his image on a lie, to let thousands of strangers admire a version of our relationship funded by money he'd taken while I slept, then confronting him privately wouldn't change anything. Breaking up quietly wouldn't undo what he'd already taken from me, not just cash, but trust, agency, dignity. I closed the app, picked up my keys, and drove to the police station. By the time I walked through those doors, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was done pretending this was something it wasn't. The police station smelled like disinfectant and old paperwork, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, whether you wanted it to or not. I sat in a hard plastic chair, my phone heavy in my hand, replaying the same few seconds of footage over and over in my mind before I ever showed it to anyone else. Lucas's face in the dim light, the casual way he opened my wallet, the absence of guilt. I half expected my hands to start shaking again, but they didn't. I felt eerily steady, like my body had already processed the worst of it and was now just following instructions. The officer who spoke with me was calm, almost gentle. He asked questions I'd already rehearsed answers to. How long had this been happening? Did we live together? Did I give him permission to take the money? I showed him the video, my bank withdrawal records, the notes I'd made tracking what went missing and when. He watched the footage twice without comment, then nodded slowly. "This is straightforward," he said. "This is theft. You have clear video evidence. If you want to move forward, we can file a report." The word theft landed differently when someone else said it. Not boyfriend trouble, not relationship drama, not a misunderstanding. Theft. A crime. Something that existed outside the emotional fog I'd been drowning in for weeks. I filed the report. They gave me a case number and a copy of the paperwork with Lucas's full name printed on it in black ink. Seeing it there made my chest tighten in a way the video hadn't. This wasn't private anymore. This wasn't just between us. It was real in a way that couldn't be walked back with apologies or explanations. I went home and waited. Lucas came over that night like nothing had changed. He kissed me, hello, complained about traffic, told me about a brand that had reached out to him for a potential partnership. I listened, nodded, even smiled at the right moments, all while the knowledge sat between us like an invisible wall. When he went to bed early, I stayed up in the living room, staring at my phone, waiting for the notification I knew would come. 2 days later it did. Another post. Another smiling photo of us. This one from a weekend trip we'd taken the month before. Ocean in the background. Sunlight on his face. His arm around my shoulders. The caption was softer this time, almost sentimental. Adventures with my favorite person. She makes everything better. I didn't hesitate. I opened the comments and typed slowly, deliberately, so there would be no mistake, no chance for misinterpretation. "Actually, I'm pressing charges for the $800 you stole from my wallet. Here's the police report." Then I attached the screenshot. His full name, the case number, the charge, theft. For a moment, nothing happened. The comment sat there quietly beneath his photo, just another line of text among dozens of heart emojis and compliments. Then the likes froze. The comments stopped refreshing, and suddenly they exploded. "What did I just read? Is this real?" "She has a police report. Lucas explained this right now." Within an hour, there were hundreds of comments. By the end of the day, over 1,000. Some people accused me of lying, of being bitter, of trying to ruin him. Others were stunned, angry on my behalf, demanding answers he didn't have. Screenshots spread faster than he could delete them. Drama accounts reposted the image with captions like, "Influencer exposed," and "When the aesthetic is a lie." He deleted the post. Then he started scrubbing my comment from every other photo I'd appeared in. Then he blocked me. But it didn't matter. Once something like that escapes into the internet, it doesn't come back. My phone started buzzing around midnight. Missed calls, voicemails, texts that swung wildly between panic, rage, pleading, and denial. I counted 23 calls before I put my phone face down and went to sleep alone for the first time in months. 4 days later, the fallout was impossible to ignore. Friends started texting me screenshots I couldn't see because Lucas had blocked me. Tearful Instagram stories where he claimed I was manipulating the narrative, that the money had been gifts I was now weaponizing, that I was punishing him for leaving me. The story disappeared within hours, replaced by another one accusing me of controlling his finances, of emotionally abusing him, of forcing him into a position where he had no choice but to take cash. The lies were almost impressive in their boldness. Then his mother called. I answered against my better judgment because a small part of me still hoped for something human. An apology, accountability, maybe even shame. Instead, she launched into me without taking a breath. "How dare you humiliate my son like this?" she demanded. "You could have handled this privately." "He stole from me," I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. "Multiple times. I have video proof." "You were his girlfriend," she snapped. "Couples share money." "We didn't," I replied. And taking money from someone's wallet while they're asleep isn't sharing. It's theft. She called me cruel, vindictive, told me I was destroying his career over a few dollars, when I corrected her on the amount she hung up on me. By the end of the week, brands had started disappearing from his profile. Discount codes stopped working. One small skincare company quietly removed him from their website. Another posted a vague statement about ending a partnership due to conduct inconsistent with their values. They didn't name him, but they didn't have to. His follower count began to drop, slowly at first, then faster. I watched all of it from a distance, feeling less triumphant than I'd expected. Mostly I felt tired. Tired of defending reality. Tired of being painted as a villain for refusing to stay quiet. Tired of mourning a relationship that had apparently been built on a version of someone who didn't exist. And somewhere beneath all of that, there was a quieter grief. Not for the money. For the man I thought I knew, and the future I'd been planning with someone who had been stealing from me while I slept. By the second week, the noise had taken on a life of its own. I wasn't refreshing his page anymore, but I didn't have to. Screenshots found me anyway, delivered by well-meaning friends and acquaintances who felt the need to keep me informed. Every update felt like watching a distant fire contained, yet impossible to ignore. Lucas's follower count dipped below 80,000, then 78. Engagement plummeted. Posts that once pulled in thousands of likes barely scraped a few hundred, their comment sections either locked or flooded with people demanding answers he couldn't give. My inbox filled with messages from strangers. Some were supportive. People thanking me for telling the truth, for standing up for myself, for not letting someone profit off a lie. Others were less kind. Accusations that I'd gone too far, that I'd ruined someone's life over money, that public exposure was cruel, unnecessary, vindictive. I read them all, even the ones that stung, because I wanted to be honest with myself about what I'd done. There were moments I questioned it. Late at night, lying awake in a bed that felt too big, I wondered if I should have confronted him privately, if ending things quietly would have spared both of us this level of destruction. But every time that thought took hold, another screenshot would appear, another post where Lucas framed himself as a victim, another attempt to rewrite reality, and the doubt would dissolve. He wasn't remorseful, he was strategic. The lies escalated. First, the stolen money had been gifts. When that didn't hold up under scrutiny, the narrative shifted to financial abuse. He claimed I controlled him, monitored his spending, made him feel small for every purchase. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been dangerous. Accusations like that stick especially when delivered through tears to an audience primed to empathize. The problem was nothing about our actual lives supported his version of events. We didn't live together. We didn't share accounts. I'd never once told him how to spend his money. If anything, I'd covered dinners, trips, and expenses without keeping score because I believed relationships weren't transactions. The irony that he was now calling me controlling after secretly stealing from me while I slept wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. Then the podcast invitation came. It was one of those influencer drama shows that thrived on chaos, neon lighting, exaggerated thumbnails, hosts who pretended to be neutral while stirring the pot just enough to keep the views coming. Lucas went on first. 40 minutes of practiced vulnerability, carefully timed tears, a narrative where he was a victim fighting to survive under the weight of a powerful, financially dominant girlfriend. I didn't watch it live. A friend sent me the recording with a message that simply read, "You need to see this." I almost didn't. I didn't want to give his version more space in my head, but halfway through listening to him talk about survival and fear, something in me hardened. This wasn't just about saving face anymore. He was telling lies that painted me as an abuser to tens of thousands of people. 2 days later, the podcast host reached out to me. At first, I said no. I was exhausted. I didn't want to become a character in someone else's spectacle. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that silence wasn't neutral. Silence let his version stand unchallenged. So I agreed. I didn't go on to yell. I didn't go on to cry. I went on with receipts. I brought bank statements showing I never had access to his accounts, text messages where he thanked me for buying him dinners, and gifts messages that didn't read like someone living under financial control. Screenshots of him asking me for money, which I'd given, followed by the thefts that continued anyway. And of course, the video. The host's tone shifted the moment I mentioned it. "So just to be clear," she said slowly, "you have footage of him taking cash from your wallet while you were asleep." "Yes," I replied, "multiple times." "And he never asked you for permission?" "Never." "And there's an active police report?" "Yes." The rest of the interview unfolded in uncomfortable silence, punctuated by clarifying questions. I didn't editorialize. I didn't speculate about his motives. I simply laid out the timeline and let the facts speak for themselves. The episode dropped 2 days later. In 48 hours, it surpassed 200,000 views. The comments were brutal. He really went on a podcast and lied when there's video evidence. She stayed calm the entire time. That tells you everything. This is why you don't weaponize victimhood. Lucas's follower count nosedived again. 71,000. Then 65. Brands that had been quietly watching now cut ties openly. The narrative had shifted too far too fast for damage control to keep up. Then the detective called. They'd reviewed everything. The video, the documentation, the timeline. They were moving forward with charges. Misdemeanor theft based on the amount and the evidence. Lucas had been formally charged. A week later, his lawyer reached out to mine because, yes, at this point, I had my own attorney. They wanted to talk about a resolution. I stared at the email for a long time before responding, aware that the story was entering its final act, whether I was ready for it or not. By the time lawyers got involved, the story had stopped feeling like mine. It had grown too large, too distorted shaped by headlines, thumbnails, comment sections, and strangers arguing over a relationship they'd only ever known through curated images and selective truths. I'd wake up some mornings and forget briefly that any of this was real, that there was a police case attached to my name, that someone I'd loved was now a defendant because of choices he'd made quietly in the dark. The first email from Lucas's lawyer was formal, restrained, and predictably aggressive. They demanded I remove all posts referencing him, that I delete the screenshot of the police report, that I stop publicly disseminating defamatory statements that were harming his reputation and livelihood. The phrase cease and desist appeared twice bolded, as if volume could substitute for substance. I forwarded it to my attorney, a friend of a friend who specialized in civil litigation. He called me 10 minutes later, laughing softly. "They're bluffing," he said. "Truth is an absolute defense. If what you posted is accurate and you have video proof, they don't have a case. They're trying to scare you into silence." I wasn't scared. I was tired. Tired of being framed as ruthless for refusing to absorb someone else's wrongdoing quietly. Tired of having to justify why I wouldn't protect the image of a man who had betrayed me in the most mundane, calculated way possible. But fatigue didn't equal doubt. If anything, it sharpened my resolve. I didn't respond to the letter. Lucas tried a different approach. His lawyer reached out again this time, asking if I'd consider resolving things privately. Restitution for the missing money. A mutual statement. No admission of guilt, just a vague acknowledgement that mistakes were made. The implication was clear: help him save face, and this could all go away. I declined. The money had never been the point. Accountability was. Behind the scenes, his online presence was unraveling faster than anyone publicly acknowledged. I heard through mutual acquaintances that his brand deals had evaporated almost overnight. Emails went unanswered. Calls weren't returned. Influencer management firms quietly removed his name from their rosters. Without the trust of his audience, the platform he'd built collapsed under its own weight. And still the lies didn't stop. Lucas posted less frequently now, but when he did, the tone had shifted. Gone was the polished confidence. In its place was something brittle captions about resilience, about growth, about surviving betrayal. He never named me, but he didn't have to. The implication hovered in every carefully worded sentence. Meanwhile, the legal process moved at its own infuriating pace. The detective scheduled a meeting to go over everything one final time. I brought the same documents I'd already submitted, the same video I'd watched so many times I could recite it frame by frame. When it was over, he nodded once and said they'd be formally filing charges. A week later, Lucas's attorney contacted mine again. This time the tone was different. They wanted to discuss terms. They proposed full restitution, the estimated $800, in exchange for me dropping the charges and agreeing not to pursue civil action. They also requested that any future public statements be measured and non-inflammatory. Still no admission. Still no accountability beyond a quiet transfer of money that could be framed as a misunderstanding. I didn't answer immediately. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the same place where all of this had begun, and thought about what justice actually looked like to me. It wasn't watching Lucas spiral online. It wasn't watching his follower count bleed out in real time. It wasn't even seeing his carefully constructed life fall apart. It was the truth being spoken plainly without spin. The next morning, I sent my counteroffer. Full restitution of $820, my documented estimate. A public statement posted on his own account, clearly admitting that he took money from my wallet without my knowledge or permission on multiple occasions. No euphemisms, no justifications, and a direct acknowledgement that his previous claims of financial abuse were false. In exchange, I would drop the criminal charges and agree not to pursue civil action. His lawyer responded 2 days later. They needed time. Those 2 weeks felt longer than the entire relationship. I went back to my routines, work, gym, dinners with friends who knew the real story and never asked me to soften it for their comfort. Occasionally, I'd hear updates through the grapevine. Lucas was struggling, looking for non-influencer work, trying to pivot his content. None of it was landing. Part of me felt a flicker of sympathy, quickly followed by resolve. Consequences weren't cruelty. They were the natural result of choices made repeatedly, deliberately. When the email finally came, I read it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining it. They agreed. The wording of the statement had been negotiated line by line, but the meaning was intact, clear, unambiguous, true. The money arrived first, a direct transfer, $820 deposited quietly into my account. Seeing it there didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure beginning to take shape. The statement went live the following Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, it was everywhere. I didn't see the statement when it first went up. A friend texted me a screenshot before I opened the app myself, as if she was bracing me for impact. I stared at the image on my phone for a long moment, my heart thudding in a way that surprised me. After weeks of noise, spin, and denial, the words looked almost unreal in their simplicity. I want to address the situation with my ex-girlfriend. I took money from her wallet without her knowledge or permission on multiple occasions. This was wrong. My previous statements suggesting she was financially controlling were not accurate. I take full responsibility for my actions and have made full restitution. I am deeply sorry for the harm I caused. No qualifiers, no excuses, no blame shifting. Just the truth laid bare for everyone who had watched this unfold to see. The reaction was immediate and unforgiving. Screenshots of the statement spread across platforms within hours, accompanied by captions that ranged from vindicated outrage to grim acceptance. Some people praised him for taking responsibility. Others pointed out correctly that accountability offered under legal pressure wasn't the same as remorse freely given. The brands that had dropped him didn't come back. New partnerships didn't appear. The apology didn't restore what had already been broken. Within a week, his follower count dropped from 68,000 to 54. The aesthetic he'd built his career on, spoiled boyfriend, aspirational lifestyle, curated perfection, collapsed under the weight of its own contradiction. Once people knew the foundation was theft, the content felt hollow. Every new post was met with skepticism, every smile scrutinized for sincerity. I watched all of this from a distance, not out of spite, but out of a need to understand the scale of what had happened. Accountability, I realized, wasn't a single moment. It was a long tail of consequences that stretched far beyond an apology or a payout. Legally, things wrapped up quickly after that. I signed the paperwork agreeing to drop the criminal charges. The case was closed. No trial, no drawn-out court dates, no more lawyers' emails clogging my inbox. The relief was immediate and strange, like stepping off a treadmill you'd been running on for so long you'd forgotten what standing still felt like. Some people thought I should have pushed harder, let the charges go to court, forced him to face probation, community service, a permanent record. I understood the impulse. But criminal trials are slow, expensive, and unpredictable. Even a conviction would likely have resulted in little more than a slap on the wrist. What had already happened, the public acknowledgement, the collapse of a carefully constructed lie, was arguably more impactful. And I was done. That didn't mean the aftermath disappeared. Lucas's family still blamed me. His mother told people at their church that I'd ruined her son's life over nothing. His sister unfollowed anyone who still followed me, as if digital distance could rewrite reality. Mutual friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the idea that someone they'd liked could also be someone who'd stolen and lied. I let them go. What surprised me most was the quiet that followed. No more late-night phone calls. No more notifications pinging with updates or accusations. No more feeling like I had to be on guard, ready to defend myself at any moment. Just space. In that space, the grief finally caught up to me. I missed him. Not the version of Lucas who stole from me while I slept. not the man who lied publicly and tried to paint me as an abuser to save himself. I miss the version I thought I knew, the one who made me laugh, who could talk for hours about nothing and everything, who felt like home in moments when the world was too loud. That person might have existed, or maybe he never did. Maybe he was always a composite of charm and convenience, and I only saw what I wanted to see. I'll probably never know. What I do know is this: I am not anyone's ATM. I am not a prop for someone else's curated life, and I am not obligated to stay silent when someone wrongs me just because the truth makes people uncomfortable. A few people have asked me if I'd ever date an influencer again. Honestly, I don't know. The performance of relationships, the constant documentation, the pressure to turn intimacy into content, it's exhausting. But I don't believe in punishing entire groups of people for the choices of one person. For now, I'm focused on rebuilding something quieter, more grounded, something that doesn't need an audience to feel real. I'm working. I'm spending time with friends who knew the truth before it was trending. I'm relearning how to trust my instincts after months of being told I was overreacting. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this: when something feels off, it probably is. Count your cash. Ask the hard questions. Don't let love convince you that clarity is cruelty. The truth comes out eventually. You might as well let it come out on your terms. When everything finally ended, I expected relief to feel louder. I thought there would be a moment, some internal click where I'd feel victorious, vindicated, lighter. Instead, what settled over my life was something far more subdued. Quiet. A stillness that felt unfamiliar after weeks of chaos accusations and constant emotional vigilance. No more legal emails. No more screenshots flooding my phone. No more strangers arguing about my life in comment sections. Just silence. At first, the quiet felt unsettling. I'd grown used to bracing myself to waking up with my chest already tight, wondering what version of the story would be circulating that day. Without that constant tension, my body didn't know what to do. I caught myself reaching for my phone out of habit, only to realize there was nothing left to check. That's when the reflection really began. I thought a lot about who I'd been before Lucas, about how easily I'd folded parts of myself to make space for someone else's world, how often I'd ignored discomfort because it felt easier than confrontation, how many small instincts I'd overridden in the name of being supportive, understanding, not dramatic. None of that made what happened my fault, but it did make it instructive. I replayed moments from our relationship with a new lens, the casual jokes about my job paying well, the way he'd grown comfortable, assuming I'd cover things without discussion, the subtle entitlement disguised as charm. None of it screamed danger on its own. Together they formed a pattern I'd been too close to see. I didn't hate him. That surprised people. Hate would have been simpler, cleaner. But what I felt was closer to sadness for him, for myself, for the version of us that had existed only in my imagination. He'd chosen shortcuts over honesty, performance over integrity, and eventually those choices cost him everything he'd built. I didn't celebrate that. I accepted it. Occasionally, I'd hear updates through distant connections. Lucas working a regular job now, fewer posts, no brand deals, a much smaller audience, if any at all. I didn't seek these updates out, but when they came, they didn't bring satisfaction. Just confirmation that life moves forward with or without applause. The experience changed how I approached relationships. Not in a cynical way. I didn't harden myself or decide that trust was foolish, but I became more attentive to my own boundaries, more willing to ask uncomfortable questions, less eager to explain away behavior that didn't sit right just because I cared about someone. Love I learned shouldn't require self-erasure. One night, months later, I cleaned out my dresser and found the wallet, the same one that had unknowingly started all of this. I opened it half expecting some emotional reaction to hit me out of nowhere. Nothing did. It was just a wallet. That felt like progress. I still believe there are versions of this story where things ended differently, where I confronted him privately, where he confessed, where accountability came without public collapse. But that version of events required a person willing to tell the truth when it was still easy. That wasn't the person I was with. What I do know is this silence would have protected his image, not my dignity. And choosing truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it came with consequences, allowed me to walk away without carrying his lies with me. I'm not perfect. I didn't handle everything flawlessly, but I handled it honestly. And that matters. If you're listening to this and something in your own relationship feels off, not dramatic, not explosive, just quietly wrong, pay attention to that feeling. Don't let anyone convince you that noticing reality makes you cruel. Don't let love become the reason you abandon yourself. Trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and remember you're allowed to tell the truth even when it's inconvenient, especially then,